African American performance has always been an integral part of entertainment in Bowling Green and the nation. Join us as we learn about the experiences and the people that help shape American music right here in Bowling Green. Today on Warren County Preserves. Hello, I'm Joan Needham. Expression through music has been at the core of the Black experience in America since slavery. Through music and entertainment, African Americans have expressed their joys as well as their sorrows. But despite the hardships and the challenges, the African American contribution to music and entertainment has shaped the American culture.
Black music, or music by Black people, has always been a core part of American music. And it evolved from the experience of people of African descent coming to this country and the experiences that were created there. So it could only have happened here to start off with. But it is through the music that they've been able to express their experiences in their lives. So as experiences change, the music changes. I am a poor pilgrim of sorrow. I'm lost in this wide world.
African Americans' first contribution to American music was the spiritual.
The spiritual, they call them sorrow songs. Not because they were all sorrowful, but because they came out of the institution of slavery. When we think of American music today, we have to look back to some of the foundations because spirituals were some of the first forms of American music.
Out of the spirituals of slavery evolved the minstrels. It is at this time in history that we begin to see the quandary between the love of the African American forms of entertainment, their music, their dance, their song, and the acceptance of the African Americans as people and performers. It is an irony that will last into modern times.
To make it my home, I've started to make it my home.
The people who performed in minstrels initially were white people. That's why you see the reference to blacked up or I had to cork up. And even when African Americans were able to move into the entertainment business, some of them were required to cork up, even though they were already black. They had to get the same blackness the rest of the cast had. But the two things that really helped the African Americans get into the entertainment business, one was the cakewalk.
The cakewalk was a dance and a song. One story talks about the fact that slaves used to watch the masters when they would be walking, and so they wanted to imitate the slave masters, so they would walk on their tippy toes, you know, and kick up their feet the way that, in imitation of the way that the masters would do so. And then out of that developed a dance.
And the other thing that happened was the development of a genre of songs called coon music. And there were probably 600 of those songs. And to understand the economics of the time, the shows were owned by white people. And white producers and owners were producing what the audiences wanted to see and hear. So they were selling what people were buying. And in order for the black entertainers to get into the field, they had to assimilate and regurgitate whatever the white audiences expected. And a lot of that were the very racist, offensive stereotypes that we saw developed in all of the coon music.
When whites took this music that they heard black people singing, which was the authentic music, but took it, they had to shape it and cast it in a way that was very negative, because otherwise that would fly against what was the prevailing theory at the time. How could anything wonderful come out of a people who were supposed to be inferior? Coon songs helped to promote those things. However, the music itself was very attractive and it was the rage of the time. So, if you were a musician and you were talented, what were your choices as a black person in the time period? During the minstrel time, it was big money because it was a popular form across the country. So if you were able to break into this and make earn some income, then you did so. It would help with your family. Those questions, and they have been continuous for blacks from the beginning of time to present day. At what point do I balance my soul, my spirit, my feelings about who I am and how I define and see myself? How do I balance that or look at that compared to making a living for my family and for myself and being able to express my art form and what I do? How do I be?
As black entertainers began to make strides at taking back their own song, the slave spirituals and early coon songs developed into jazz and a type of music called ragtime.
It occurred around the turn of the century, and the term came out of those minstrel songs, those coon songs. That was a development of a style. It really meant two things. It meant a style of playing folk music and dance music that was syncopated, by syncopated meaning and having complex rhythms to it. Rhythms that are off and on with the downbeat. So you could talk about ragging a tune. One example might be this song, which is taken from a collection of songs that were popular in the 1890s, In the Good Old Summertime. It's written by, the music by George Evans and the words by Ren Shields. Okay, now, the way it's written is as a waltz, and so I'll play a little bit of that, and then I'll give you an idea of what it would be if somebody was going to rag the song. I'll play it in the ragtime style. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling through the shady lanes with your baby now. Can you see the parasol just strolling through the lanes? The good old summertime. Okay, now if we would think about ragging the tune, it would be something. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling through the shady lanes with your baby love. So you have the cha, and then you have the right hand, which has the syncopation. Good old summertime.
When you think of ragtime, you might think of Scott Joplin, who's commonly thought of as the father of ragtime music. But there was a performer born right here in Bowling Green who was writing ragtime music before Joplin, and he wasn't the only phenomenal performer born in this area. When we return, I'll introduce you to some exceptional entertainers who grew up right here in Bowling Green, and we'll visit some of the venues that hosted the greats in African American entertainment. Welcome back to Warren County Preserves. After the Civil War, two men were born in the Shake Rag neighborhood of Bowling Green who would go on to become first-rate performers. Not many remember their names today, but in their time, they were royalty, and their impact on the entertainment industry is still evident. Reuben Crowdis would go on to achieve national and international fame as the performer Ernest Hogan.
He left home, ages are given as 12 or 15. Started out as many black entertainers did after the Civil War. He was born in 1865. So he started out as a pick or a pickaninny in a black low-rent tent show of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and many started that way. And from that, he moved on into more sophisticated performances, eventually moving out to the Kansas City area and Topeka, and then on to the West Coast where he performed in the Criterion Quartet, one of the four singers described by the papers as having a tenor voice clear as a bell, and he began writing music shortly after he returned from the West Coast. Wrote his first piece of music in 1895. It was published in Kansas City. But his first piece that gained national fame, or was infamous, based on how you view it, had a reference in it to be performed with Negro rag accompaniment. And this was the first time that the word rag had appeared in sheet music or song sheets. And this preceded Scott Joplin and a lot of the others who were into syncopated music that later became our ragtime. So some historians do credit him with being the first to write a piece of ragtime music.
Like so many performers of Hogan's time, his early music and dance perpetuated stereotypes, but unlike some others, his talent, ambition, and drive enabled him to push beyond the bounds of racism.
There were three top professionals who got together in 1898. Will Marion Jones, who was professionally trained as a musician, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was the Black Poet Laureate, very famous and very well known, and Hogan. And the three of them put on a production called Clarindy, or The Origin of the Cakewalk. And it was the first all-black performance at a first-class theater on Broadway. And Hogan was the man whose name was up in lights, and he performed in that, and it was just a runaway hit. In 1905, when there was a convention of National Negro Business League or leaders, he appeared and performed, but he also gave a speech along with Booker T. Washington and prominent Negro business and cultural and professional people around the country. He wrote an article one time for the Indianapolis Freeman, which was a nationally circulated black newspaper. And he said that while the orators had done a lot for the black race, their future was in the arts, because they had talent and they had the personality, and they were willing to work, and just with opportunities and chances, said they will be a credit to America.
George Hampton, or Pete Hampton as he was known on the stage, was born just a few years after Ernest Hogan and in the same neighborhood, Shake Rag. Hampton went on to become the most recorded African American and was the first African American to appear in a British movie. Despite his great talent, Hampton had to leave his home to be truly appreciated.
And he started out in the minstrel field as well, traveling with some of the low-rent traveling shows that went around. Eventually, he joined up with Laura Bowman, who was a female performer, also black, and they performed in Europe as the Darktown Aristocrats, and performed over there from something like 1903 on up for years. I'd say 10 to 15 years, and performed in all of the major cities throughout Europe. Were very popular, and King Edward had them come do a command performance at Buckingham Palace, which they did.
There has been a love-hate relationship about American music by Americans, period. And I think part of it has to do with the origins of American music and all of the things associated. But it is true that many, particularly African American performers, singers, musicians, went to Europe and were the rage and were honored. And then when others in America would see how well they were appreciated there, then their appreciation changed when they returned.
He was little recognized here when he came back to visit in Bowling Green before going for a long-term engagement in New York City. And he and Laura gave a benefit performance for a local charity at the Armory. And the newspaper write-up in the Daily News said, "Don't miss this because these two performers, you know, are internationally recognized as being excellent." And the last sentence was that admission would be limited to white people. A rather ironic turn of events, I thought.
Despite the international fame achieved by these two performers, very few remember their names today. Hogan's burial site at Mount Moriah Cemetery in Bowling Green isn't even marked.
And his initial funeral service was held in New York at a Catholic church, but then the Methodist Episcopal Church in Bowling Green had a service when his body was returned here, attended apparently heavily by both white and black persons who had known Ernest over the years. And there was, I don't know if it was in the New Orleans style, but there was a band that played for his funeral service. And at his request, no dirge was played. It was only the ragtime tunes that were his favorites. About 8 years after Hogan's death, a traveling show came through Bowling Green, the Reuben Cherry Show, and performed here. And of course, all of them were very familiar with Hogan. So they had a vaudeville carnival kind of a combination show. So after their performance, the carnival band and the members of the cast with Hogan's mother and sister went out to Mount Moriah, and they did play a dirge. So we finally got one.
When we return, we'll visit the recent past of the African American community known as Shake Rag, and we'll hear about some of the performers whose names everyone will recognize. Welcome back to Warren County Preserves. The injustices of blacks being accepted as performers, but not as social equals or even welcome patrons, continued well into the 20th century. Many famous musicians passed through Bowling Green. Even though their talents were recognized and respected, segregation continued to make life very difficult for black entertainers on the road.
You travel by car, your own car, because if you traveled by bus, well, some weren't accessible to you, or you had to sit in a certain part of the bus, and you couldn't, if you got to the bus station, you know, you couldn't just go in and use the bathroom because there would be whites only or blacks only, and then usually the blacks only, if it was there, was inferior. when you got into the city, where were you going to stay? You couldn't stay at the hotels because blacks weren't allowed there. So you had to find places. Usually people opened their homes, black people, so that you would have a place for you to stay.
Many performers traveling from Louisville to gigs in Nashville stopped to perform in Bowling Green.
There was one place called the Southern Queen Hotel, and this was the place they would usually stay, or any black person that was coming through town for any reason or visiting here, that's where they stayed. And actually I grew up next door to a place, and the lady would take in roomers there. And I can remember as a child when Sugar Ray Robinson was in town, and he had his big pink and blue Cadillac parked in front of our house. And of course all of us kids were going out there looking at it, and on the back of the Cadillac it had in little gold writing, Sugar Ray.
The inability to patronize white establishments necessitated that black neighborhoods be independent communities, even though many, like Shake Rag, were only a few blocks from all of the resources of a downtown. Local musician and singer John Edmonds doesn't remember segregation as much as a neighborhood of family.
Growing up, it was my whole life. I went to church there. I went to school there. All my friends were there. And you've heard the old African saying that it takes an entire village to raise a child. And that was the atmosphere that I grew up in. Everybody knew everybody, and if you're a child, if you misbehave in any part of town, any part of Shake Rag, any adult would correct you and send you home. And even in school, the teachers that I had in school, they all knew my parents. They had either gone to school with my parents, or they had either taught my parents. And they also taught in Sunday school and church. So it was just a big interactive situation with the school and the entertainment aspect, the churches, the whole works. It was just one, and I won't say always big happy family, but just like families, there are always squabbles. But it was just one big family. There was always several bands in the community, and they would play at dances and functions. And of course, there were groups that put on plays. And of course, your churches always had excellent music, excellent musicians. When I was growing up, different churches had reputations. The ones that had the stoic, sober, for lack of a better word, type of worship service. And then you had the ones that kicked in a little more influence from the rhythm and blues and the blues elements of music. And then you had the ones that just really, really got down. And these were usually the sanctified churches. But the funny thing about that, everybody went to their own church on Sunday morning, and we went back Sunday night. Well, the holiness churches would usually last much longer. Sometimes they would go to midnight on Sunday night. So everybody would leave their own church on Sunday night, and everybody would gather at the sanctified church because they had the best music.
Music in the church was a form of expression and worship. For entertainment, black patrons could go to the Capitol Theater or the Quonset Hut Auditorium, although they were required to use a secondary entrance. John Edmonds remembers when he played piano at the Quonset Hut for a fashion show when he was only 12 or 13 years old.
So I guess this was my first, I never thought of it in that respect, but I guess it is my first paying job. And it was at the old famous Quonset. And that was my first time actually going in. I had heard about it, and I had ridden by it with my parents many times, and I knew that this was the place where a lot of great artists had performed, like Ray Charles, Mahalia Jackson, Clara Ward singers, Fats Domino, Peg Leg Bates, and so many others.
The Capitol Theater and the Quonset Hut Auditorium were white venues, but the community of Shake Rag had many of its own clubs, places where black patrons could use the front door.
But there were a lot of little clubs in Bowling Green. Of course, they had the jukeboxes, and you went to listen to music. But I remember there being a dance hall on 3rd Street between Chestnut and State. And this is a place where they would have a lot of dances. They'd bring bands in, they'd play, and of course they had the liquor and the drinks, and everybody would just party. But there were lots of places, the American Legion, the Elks Club. They would have people like Ike and Tina Turner, Minnie Collier, Etta James. All these people came to Bowling Green. And the Quonset wasn't the only place where they performed.
Bowling Green was fortunate to host many amazing black entertainers and is proud to say that some of them were born in the Shake Rag community. But the history of African American entertainment, whether it is our local history or our national history, whether it is about spirituals, minstrels, or rag, is not really one of black music or black dance, but it is the history of our American culture, a uniquely American story.